It was Friday morning, and I was already anticipating my departure from the office. It is not that the work of an inside salesperson is inherently boring, it is simply that my colleague was not particularly engaging. In fact, if I had the opportunity, I would devote my time to these hobbies. I should, perhaps, provide you with some background information about myself. I am Scott Evans, and I consider myself to be an ordinary individual. I am 56 years of age, with a height of approximately 5 feet 6 inches and a weight of 170 pounds. My waist measurement is 36 inches. I do not possess a physique that is particularly attractive to women, but I believe that I am not a source of fear for them. I am 48 years old, and I have predominantly dark hair, with a moderate amount of gray. My eyes are arguably my most notable physical feature. They are blue, though some of my acquaintances believe they are gray. My wife is Lisa, and we have been married for 18 years. Lisa is 44 years old and continues to be physically attractive to me. She is the type of woman that many men find appealing, although not everyone does. She falls into the category of women who possess a distinctive quality. Do you comprehend what I am attempting to convey? She is 57 years old, and while she has not disclosed her weight to me, I estimate it to be approximately 145 pounds. While she may not be considered skinny, as I previously stated, she remains attractive to me. I find her hips particularly alluring when she walks, and her legs are also quite impressive. I have devoted years to studying women's legs, and I would consider myself an expert on the subject. I estimate that her hair is still mostly light brown, although I have not seen it in its natural color for approximately 3 to 4 years. She has informed me that her colorist uses a color that matches her natural hair color, and I trust her judgment. Lisa and I were introduced when I first moved to this city and decided to look at, and she was attractive enough to capture my attention, yet not so much that I hesitated. This proved to be an advantageous situation, as her personality rapidly compensated for any deficiencies in her appearance, allowing me to act with confidence. It was somewhat easier to interact with her because we had a common topic of conversation, which facilitated our acquaintance without undue pressure. She was cordial and welcoming, as one would expect when interacting with potential new tenants. However, I do not believe following the signing of the lease, I was invited for coffee by the landlord, which I accepted. While it was possible that she was merely being polite, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that she was interested. As it was late in the afternoon, she departed 15 minutes earlier than expected, and we proceeded to continue our conversation over lattes. The discussion was highly engaging, and I learned that Lisa had worked in the retail sector for several years after leaving school. However, she had decided to pursue further studies after a couple of years and had subsequently obtained a bachelor's degree in. At the time, she was uncertain about her future career path. However, she believed that marketing would provide the greatest flexibility in pursuing diverse career opportunities across various industries. She was eager to move beyond the retail sector, which she found tedious due to the long working hours. She enjoyed client interaction but disliked the weekends and evenings. She came across a job posting on Monster for a leasing agent and property manager position at a large apartment complex. This role seemed more professionally oriented and aligned with her aspirations. The position allowed her to interact with clients while also offering more conventional work hours. By the time we met, she had already been employed there for approximately 18 months and was highly satisfied with the role. I proceeded to recount my own experience, noting that I had graduated from a modest private institution in the West at the age of 22 with a bachelor's degree in business administration. Like her, I lacked clarity regarding my long-term career aspirations while pursuing my studies. Consequently, I found myself transitioning between entry-level positions for several years until I eventually discerned I would like to take a moment to provide some background information about myself. Firstly, I found that I was not suited to a role where I was responsible for the work results of other people. This became apparent to me during my time in a number of junior management positions, including that of night parking manager at a hotel in the city where I was living at the time. Secondly, while I enjoyed the competitive aspect of sales, I found that I was unable to develop quick relationships with people when meeting them for the first time. This was due to the fact that I had to force myself to smile even when I was in a good mood. As a result of this, I found it challenging to work in outside sales. A period of introspection and exploration of several less than ideal career paths led to the realization that inside sales was a good fit for me. I was still able to enjoy the competitive side of sales in general and use my good voice, however I was not limited by aspects of my personality that might make outside sales more challenging. I smiled readily and without conscious effort when I finally glanced at my watch. We had spent several hours together. Lisa, I am pleased to continue this discussion for as long as you wish, but I wish to respect your time. Should we conclude this conversation, I believe it is unnecessary to state that we will meet again very soon. I have always heard that women say this. Like confidence, I thought, why not? You're quite confident, aren't you, Scott? She inquired with a laugh. Very well, I will call you at the office when you have finished moving into your apartment. Perhaps I will bring pizza and beer, she continued. I do not believe we are close enough to require my assistance with the moving, I replied, laughing. It's a deal, she said, smiling. I escorted her to her car. I considered the kiss and decided that I would avoid any potentially awkward situations by being proactive in my reluctance to kiss her. When I opened the door for her, I said, I hope you enjoy our exciting conversation tonight. Many women only see me as a body, and it gets really tiring after a while. This turned out to be a strategic move. It proved to be a prudent decision, as it elicited a hearty laugh from her as she entered her vehicle. I subsequently learned that she was genuinely grateful for my efforts to make this transition as seamless as possible. I resolved that, at this juncture in my life, I would allow circumstances to unfold naturally. I was intrigued by the prospect of reconnecting with Lisa and hoped that she shared my interest, but I did not allow her to monopolize my thoughts, particularly given that I was a recent arrival in town and had recently commenced employment. Instead, I undertook a comprehensive examination of our company's products and those of our competitors. As an industrial supply company, we offered a diverse range of products, though few of them required significant effort on my part. Our primary product from a sales perspective was our service. Our service offered a unique perspective. We managed our clients' inventory levels in a way that optimized either their inventory levels or their order volumes. This was done by determining which approach would benefit the client the most. One approach involved offering slightly better pricing, while the other involved keeping inventory levels as low as possible without risking a shortage of essential items. I must have been one of the few individuals to recognize the true competitive advantage we possessed, as I became our company's top salesman within approximately 18 months. However, I will refrain from discussing my professional achievements and instead focus on the subsequent developments in my personal life. As I previously alluded to, I was initially perceived as aloof and detached from social interactions. Nevertheless, I crafted a legitimate excuse to visit Lisa's office. I informed her that I would be visiting the office in a couple of days and that I had enjoyed our conversation. I also stated that I would be interested in pursuing a further discussion, although I did not commit to anything specific. I wanted to ascertain her interest. Approximately 1 week later, she visited my house right before leaving work on a Sunday afternoon to ensure that I was aware of the planned pool complex social event. Subsequently, she called to inform me that the entire complex was covered with posters advertising the mixer, which I interpreted as a sign that she was interested in further meetings. Thus, our relationship commenced, which, in many ways, exemplified the ideal trajectory for a romantic relationship, as recommended by experts. However, we were both aware that our relationship was still in its infancy. We were interested in each other on a romantic level and proceeded to take things slowly. This teasing, so to speak, was enjoyable. We saw each other once every couple of weeks, and I was definitely looking forward to our next meeting and hoped she felt the same. We also spoke on the phone once or twice a week, and the majority of our time together could be described as very informal. Our relationship was informal and characterized by a strong connection based on shared interests. We frequently engaged in leisure activities, including watching our favorite reality shows, which provided us with a similar level of enjoyment as going out for a meal and dancing. She was able to understand and appreciate my unique sense of humor, which was an invaluable aspect of our dynamic. Additionally, we had a remarkable time together without engaging in physical intimacy for an extended period. There was a considerable amount of physical contact at the outset, which I would not wish to resume. It was, however, an enjoyable aspect of our relationship for a period of time. I have always believed that it helped to strengthen our bond as a couple. We engaged in a form of reciprocal commentary, similar to the one I previously described, which I found particularly commendable. As time passed, our time together became more and more frequent, until we were spending several evenings and lunches together each week. Despite the evident chemistry between us, we had not yet progressed to physical intimacy. I believe we continued in this manner for so long that neither of us was aware of the underlying issues. How to break the cycle? The cycle was eventually broken when we took Lisa's dog, Sophie, to the dog park. There was some debate as to Sophie's breed, with suggestions including Labrador mix. We were walking back to the car from the fenced-in play area when I apparently stepped on a loose rock or something and fell. As is often the case, I made light of the situation. As possible, Lisa began laughing uncontrollably and Sophie approached, licking my face in what can be described as an affectionate gesture. "This must be the first such gesture you've received in months," Lisa said, laughing so hard that she nearly cried. "Well, if I cannot receive this gesture from you, then I will have to settle for what I receive from Sophie." As soon as this remark was made, I became anxious. It came without hesitation. I could have responded to it in a variety of ways. I had hoped for an answer in a light and humorous tone. I was surprised by what she did next. She knelt down and straddled me. She might have said something like, "I didn't know you were waiting for me, but I'm not sure." She immediately covered my mouth with hers and proceeded to give me the most passionate kiss I had ever experienced in my life. I was no longer the young man for whom a simple kiss would be erotic, and I immediately became aroused. Lisa obviously noticed this since she began to rub against me. It was clear that we needed to leave the location promptly, as the situation was rapidly escalating and becoming increasingly inappropriate in a public setting. We proceeded to her residence, where we engaged in prolonged and passionate kissing. The remainder of the day, evening, and night were characterized by a profound intensity of emotion and physical intimacy. As you might have surmised, our transition to a physical relationship served as the catalyst for our subsequent union in every aspect except the legal one. We were seldom apart, except when one of us was engaged in work or I was engaged in golf. I even attempted to persuade her to play golf with me on occasion, but she was adamantly opposed. I cited it as my cave time, and I was incredibly happy. She made it clear that she was happy too. Although I did not feel the need to get married, I could not imagine ever wanting anyone else. A few months later, I proposed to her at the same time the main character proposed on the current season of The Bachelor. It might not sound very romantic, but for us, it was very well our way. Lisa laughed until she cried, or perhaps it was the other. After a brief interval, she resumed, "Not that you are not already aware, but I feel compelled to offer you an official affirmation. I am delighted to confirm that our union is indeed proceeding as planned." As is often the case with marriages, ours began with a flurry of excitement and soon settled into a more serene and comfortable rhythm. Lisa and I shared numerous common interests, but we also each pursued our individual passions. We contemplated the prospect of children, but ultimately, Initially, we did not perceive the optimal moment to introduce a third party into our relationship. We were thoroughly enjoying each other's company and did not anticipate the addition of a third person to alter that dynamic. Over time, however, we found ourselves continuing with our typical sexual activity, which evolved from more than twice a day to 2, 4, or even several times a week. I was content with this progression, as I was already 46 years old and my libido had diminished. Nevertheless, I derived significant pleasure from our intimate time together. Our intimate time together was no longer a daily necessity, as it had been in the past. It seemed that Lisa felt similarly. We began to explore a variety of positions, role-playing, and dirty talk at an early stage. While these experiments were initially enjoyable, we discovered that the more fundamental positions and actions were just as satisfying as those that might be considered more adventurous. Approximately 2 years ago, Lisa began to exhibit subtle but noticeable changes. At the time, I was unaware of the changes in Lisa's interest in sexual activity. She rarely dressed at home in a way that would attract my attention, which was not unusual for someone in a long-term marriage. Interestingly, at the same time, she began to dress even nicer for work. She almost always wore sexy heels and, although she used to wear skirts only occasionally, she now wore them almost all the time. I asked her about it and she said that her role called for by that time, she had been promoted to regional manager for her property management company and was highly regarded within her organization, as previously mentioned. Lisa became less interested in our sexual relationship, and I found that although my libido had declined in recent years, I still desired more than I was receiving over the past few months. At that time, I began reading stories on literotica to satisfy my sexual needs. While perusing a narrative of a spanking nature, wherein the sexual act was delineated in exhaustive detail and infidelity was regarded as an exhilarating occurrence by all parties involved, I experienced a sudden realization while engrossed in the tale. The narrative was presented from a female perspective, and the protagonist, Linda, was a resident of a city situated a mere few hours' journey from our own. She had been wed to her husband, Steve, for 2 years. In contrast to Lisa and I, Linda was the CEO of a property management company, while Steve worked in sales support for an industrial equipment supply company. Linda was 59 years old and weighed 130 pounds with dark hair and blue eyes. Steve was 55 years old and weighed 190 pounds with graying and thinning hair. The essence of the narrative was that Steve was unable to satisfy Linda. Neither he nor I derive any pleasure from she would read stories on literotica that insulted men, but that is simply our own perception. Despite her generosity, Linda loved Steve despite his shortcomings. She was willing to engage in sexual activities with other men who possessed greater physical attributes. These encounters occurred while Steve was absent, either at work or fishing. He was aware of these activities, yet they were never discussed. One might label this perception as paranoia, but there were too many instances of this behavior for it to be dismissed. It is unclear whether Lisa perused literotica and was indifferent to its content, or whether she authored the narrative herself or had a male partner do so. I opted to take sick leave and visit Radio Shack to procure a range of voice-activated recorders and motion detector cameras. I had assumed such devices were mere fiction, but it became evident that they were, in fact, commercially available, at least for the purposes of my account. We found ourselves with limited options for concealment. I eventually located sufficient locations for microphones and cameras to ensure comprehensive coverage of the critical areas. It was challenging to maintain normalcy around Lisa for the following few days, but I attempted to do so. I would have been remiss if my suspicions were proven incorrect, even if they were ultimately untrue. However, recent events provided compelling evidence that Lisa and I needed to engage in an honest dialogue about the physical aspects of our relationship. Perhaps I assumed too much. We communicated openly and honestly about everything else, and I expected her to tell me if there was something she didn't like about our relationship in the bedroom. Now that I think about it, I realized that I myself was not happy with the way things were, and I did not raise this issue with her. We are back to the beginning of the story. I was looking forward to leaving the office at 3:00 p.m. This afternoon, I embarked on my inaugural fishing excursion. This presented a valuable opportunity to ascertain whether my suspicions were unfounded or if the parallels in the aforementioned narrative were merely a coincidence. Finally, at 3 p.m., I promptly departed for the golf course, eager to engage in my favorite pastime. It was handicap day, and I was assigned a 13 handicap, which I felt was not entirely accurate. Nevertheless, I was determined to give my best, even if it was not my best round. Upon returning home, I was greeted by my partner, who inquired about my performance. I informed her that I had played a round with Terry, who is a highly skilled golfer. I then added, "Terry is a true golfer, she never plays well." We proceeded to discuss the game. In the same spirit, which I have since realized was maintained for a couple of years, I could think of little other than checking my tracking devices. I finally had the opportunity to do so on Sunday afternoon when Lisa went to the mall. At that point, it was unclear whether she had gone to the mall or perhaps gone elsewhere. The distinction was becoming increasingly difficult to discern. It was more challenging to await confirmation rather than immediately confronting her. It is important to consider the potential consequences of such an action, particularly when there are only suspicions to support it. In such a scenario, there is a possibility that she would either deny the allegations or simply assert that she was not at fault and was not interested in addressing the situation. Neither of these outcomes seemed favorable. The evidence I had at my disposal provided me with a sense of moral justification. In this instance, a small victory was of significant importance. The situation ultimately proved to be as unfavorable as I had envisioned. I had no prior acquaintance with the individual in question, and I was not particularly invested in the outcome. I recognized that I should have been motivated to confront him physically, but he was not personally acquainted with me and was under no obligation to me. In contrast, Lisa was under an obligation to me. Not much, of course, just a little about giving up everyone else and a little respect. Two things really hurt me about what I saw and heard. First of all, the guy had more than me. Mine is just average at best, but I never knew Lisa had a problem with it. I guess I was naive to believe all that nonsense that good women sometimes say. It's not the notion that size is of greater consequence than how it is utilized is a fallacious one, at least in this particular instance. Furthermore, Lisa exhibited a remarkable degree of assertiveness in her sexual discourse with the aforementioned individual. I can only draw a parallel between my emotional state at that moment and a period in my past when I experienced a significant loss of employment and a concomitant sense of overwhelming despair. However, this instance was 100-fold more traumatic. It was as if the very essence of my being had been drained. I acknowledge that I sat down at the table and wept uncontrollably for an extended period. I was at a loss as to how to proceed. One thing was certain, I needed to collect my thoughts. I could not face Lisa, and I could not pretend that everything was fine between us. How could I even entertain such a notion? I sat at the table and wept for an extended period. I was uncertain about my next steps. One thing was clear, I needed to leave to collect my thoughts. I was unable to face Lisa, and I was similarly unable to feign that everything was fine between us. How could I even entertain the notion that she was interested in maintaining a positive relationship with me? Such a notion would be arrogant. If she did not value fidelity, why should I assume that she placed sufficient value on our shared future? That afternoon, my time with Bill was agreeable. Candidly, the initial excitement was beginning to wane. However, Scott's modicum of dignity did not elicit much enthusiasm from me, now that I was accustomed to Bill's considerable one. Nevertheless, I was eagerly anticipating an evening with Scott, which might include dinner and perhaps some physical affection. I was uncertain as to why, but Scott seemed somewhat despondent recently. He typically returned from golf around 7 p.m. I began to experience concern when he was still absent by 8 p.m. He had not left a message, so I attempted to contact him via telephone, but the phone was turned off. This was unusual because he rarely turned off his phone, so I was unsure of what else to try. I proceeded to go upstairs and observed that numerous items belonging to Scott had been removed from the top shelf of his dresser. I then checked the bathroom. Furthermore, it was evident that a considerable number of his toiletries were missing. This development prompted me to conduct a more thorough examination of his belongings, which revealed that numerous items were also missing from his closet. At this juncture, I was overcome with a sense of urgency and distress. It was at this moment that I became aware of his wedding ring, which was conspicuously left on my dresser. Despite its isolated placement, the ring seemed to convey a profound message. I was struck by the realization that he was likely unaware of its presence, given the circumstances. I was concerned that he might discover the truth or that he might take action if he did discover it. I am aware that this may seem implausible, but it is, in fact, true. Alternatively, it is more likely that I simply stopped thinking about such matters or feeling guilty about my actions a long time ago. I recalled how it began with Bill. He was also married, but he showed a great deal of interest in me, and it was. Scott was flattering and never gave me a reason to look elsewhere for attention. However, having someone new and different take an interest and be attracted to me was incredible. When he finally managed to convince me to sleep with him, I have to admit it was better than anything I had ever experienced. I was always very happy with Scott, but it is worth noting that, over the past couple of years, my interest in sexual intercourse with Scott has waned considerably. This is largely due to the fact that I have been receiving a considerable amount of sexual attention from Bill. I have also recently left several voicemails for Scott, but it is evident that he has no intention of returning my calls. I was compelled to consider the whereabouts of my partner and the potential implications of his actions. I was uncertain as to whether he would file for divorce, and if so, whether I would be affected. Despite the fact that the decision was not entirely mine, I was compelled to determine my own desires. If I wished to maintain my relationship with Scott, I needed to ascertain how to sustain his interest in remaining with me. Scott was not prone to displays of aggression, yet this situation might challenge that. I eventually retired for the evening. As the hours passed and the light began to fade, I was unsure if I had slept at all. I was acutely aware that the entire weekend had been nothing more than a nightmare, accompanied by a heavy, leaden feeling in my stomach. Bill attempted to contact me on a couple of occasions, but I chose to ignore his calls. I returned to work on Monday and carried out my duties with the utmost professionalism. I continued in this vein on Tuesday, too. On Wednesday evening, Scott finally called. I apologize for not informing you sooner. I did not intend for you to learn of this information in such a manner. I am uncertain as to how you became aware of the situation. However, it is evident that your actions were deliberate, not driven by remorse. It seems that your primary concern is not the act itself, but rather the consequences of being discovered. This is not the sentiment I intended to convey. Specifically, elucidate the rationale behind your actions. Identify the deficiencies in our relationship and explain why I was unable to fulfill your sexual needs. If you are amenable to discourse, we may be able to ascertain common ground. Do you prefer a dissolution of marriage? I am unable to provide a satisfactory response to these inquiries at this time. I am currently disinclined to pursue a divorce. I will contact you when you are able to respond to the aforementioned inquiries. Once we have done so, we can determine whether we still possess a we and how to proceed. Scott, I will contact you to express gratitude for your willingness to engage in dialogue. As previously mentioned, Scott was not typically prone to displays of anger. However, I was surprised at how calmly he took it. It seemed like we still had a chance. The conversation, however, revealed that I was woefully unprepared to answer difficult questions to which he had a right to know the answers. I decided to take the next day off so as not to be distracted by work issues and think about it. My feelings were confused. I experienced feelings of guilt, but for reasons I am reluctant to disclose, I also felt sorry for myself for getting caught and for potentially losing Bill's trust. I am aware that this may not elicit sympathy, but since I was discovered, I have been striving to be honest. I was seated at the kitchen table with a notepad and a cup of coffee, contemplating. Regarding the inquiries Scott posed, I believe the process took hours, as I consumed the majority of the coffee in the pot. Additionally, I detected a burning odor, and upon closer examination, I found that the residue at the bottom of the pot was severely burnt. This led me to conclude that the pot itself might need to be discarded. I was ultimately reliant on Scott's benevolence and forgiveness. In essence, the situation was the incident occurred because I was seeking the attention of another individual with whom I had formed a romantic attachment. While I appreciated Scott's attention and affection, I had become accustomed to it. Despite his sexual prowess not being inferior, the experience of sexual intercourse with him had lost its initial appeal. This was due to my gaining experience and becoming accustomed to Bill's standards of sexual conduct. The smaller Scott prompted a further outburst of tears. Scott did not deserve to be treated in this manner. I continued to consider the most appropriate way to break the news to him at work and over the weekend. I was aware that if I did not contact him soon, there would be no benefit in doing so. However, if I did not have satisfactory responses prepared, there would be no point in contacting him on Sunday. In the afternoon, I finally called. I reached his voicemail and left a message indicating my desire to speak with him when he was ready. He called me back approximately an hour and a half later. "Hello, Lisa. Thank you for calling back. Are you prepared to speak? I have some reservations about my responses, but I am as ready as I can be. How about lunch tomorrow? We can discuss the matter further then. Then meet me at the park." "Scott, what time is it?" 30 by the pond. "I will see you there." He had already terminated the call as I attempted to sleep that night. I grappled with the content of my impending conversation with Scott. I was compelled to acknowledge that I would have likely held a different opinion had Bill been single. Would my perspective have shifted if he had been available? It is probable that I would have changed my mind. The sexual encounters with Bill were markedly superior. However, the excitement had diminished recently. I was compelled to identify the cause and determine an appropriate course of action should the opportunity arise. By the time I fell asleep, I had formulated a plan. It was undoubtedly a risky strategy, but it was a start. I believe that my decision was, at the very least, a viable alternative. It is possible that my actions were influenced by Mackie Allen, but the following day I chose to wear Scott's preferred dress, a blue dress that accentuated the fullness of my breasts and a skirt that revealed the lower portion of my thighs. I am aware that you may question my rationale, but I believe it is essential to understand the underlying causes of our current circumstances. I have demonstrated that I am not always able to make optimal decisions in the moment. I decided that it would not be detrimental to Scott's feelings. He appeared to be somewhat reserved as he sat down next to me at 12, the cost was 40 p.m. He was a few minutes late, but what could I say about that? I waited a minute and finally he spoke. It was not an auspicious beginning to what was to become a rather uncomfortable conversation. I am aware that I deserve it. Scott, I am at a loss as to where to start. First of all, you were the best husband anyone could ask for. That makes everything even worse. I really can't think of anything you did or didn't do that I am unsure how you were able to ascertain this information, though I recognize that it may not be of consequence. I must acknowledge that my sexual encounters with Bill were, at the time, beneficial to me. However, I am acutely aware that your suffering is a direct result of my actions. While I do not wish for you to experience distress, I am compelled to admit that my sexual experiences with Bill were, at the outset, quite remarkable and remained so for an extended period. It is simply that, in my opinion, Bill is a more suitable partner. I am aware that this is not an adequate justification, but I am compelled to share my perspective. I am seeking a divorce. Despite what you may have heard, I genuinely love you. I am happy with our life together in general, and I am even content with our sexual relationship. However, I am unable to find excitement or satisfaction in it, as I do in other aspects of our relationship. I understand that you may not be interested in this solution, but I am asking you to consider staying together while allowing me to continue my relationship with Bill. As I awaited Bill's response, I experienced a sense of anticipation that seemed to last an eternity. I recognized the foolishness and selfishness in my request. Finally, Scott responded. I was taken aback, as I had anticipated that he would opt for a divorce. Given his apparent lack of interest in our sexual relationship, I questioned his sincerity in professing love for me. I was rendered speechless. I was uncertain what to anticipate, but this response was not what I expected. It was not this. I was unprepared to formulate a response that was both articulate and appropriate. I will not be able to provide you with a satisfactory answer to this question. However, if you give me a chance, you will undoubtedly feel loved and cherished. I am not currently experiencing these emotions, Lisa, but you may not care. This comment was well deserved. It was like the simultaneous impact of a blow to the face and stomach caused me to collapse to the floor. The tears came immediately, and it took me a while to respond. For the record, Scott would never lay a hand on me in anger, he is too much of a man for that. I am unsure what to say, Scott. I will give up on Bill if you tell me what to do. I am guessing you know his name. I still do not know how. You discovered this information, which likely does not matter. I believe that, in the end, our relationship will conclude in this manner. It is commendable that you are willing to terminate it if I compel you to do so. That would be sufficient for me for the time being. However, I will not force you to do so. It became increasingly remarkable. My heart raced, yet I was fearful of expressing excessive joy. I was primarily pleased that Scott appeared amenable to the prospect of remaining together. The possibility of pursuing a relationship with Bill was more than I could have hoped for, despite my initial intention to request a divorce. This is the inevitable outcome of our relationship. You may accept it or we can proceed with a legal separation. Scott, I promise you will not regret this decision. However, I will not be responsible for your actions. I will not engage in any physical contact with you, as I have not done so sufficiently. Furthermore, I will not engage in any sexual activity with you, unless you are in a committed relationship with another man. In that case, I will respect your decision and move out of the house. The basement will be finished regardless, so a bedroom and bathroom will be constructed there. Until a decision is reached regarding the relationship with Bill, the two of you will essentially be roommates. Bill may visit, but it is important to avoid any displays of affection in front of me, as this will not be tolerated. Is this what you wanted? I was overwhelmed with happiness, but at the same time, I felt a sense of loss. What was the point of staying married if Scott was going to leave the bedroom? Perhaps he will eventually change his mind about this. I had to hope, of course. Scott, you are entitled to make any demands you see fit. I am merely grateful that you have chosen to remain in this marriage. It is my hope that you will eventually desire to resume intimate relations with me. Ultimately, this decision is yours to make based on how you feel about it. Scott relocated the following day and promptly engaged the services of a contractor to commence work on the basement. Our other 2 bedrooms had already been converted into an office and a gym. I attempted to persuade him to sleep in our bedroom at least until the basement was completed, but he refused. I persisted, but to no avail. I attempted to persuade him to allow me to sleep on the sofa, but he was not amenable to this suggestion either. This naturally gave me a sense of guilt, but perhaps this was his intention all along. I waited a few days and then called Bill again. What took you so long to call, baby? Why didn't you answer my calls? It is important to understand that Bill does not consider Scott to be a weak individual. Therefore, any future instances of referring to Scott as a weakling will result in the termination of communication between you and me. Please remain calm and I will explain the situation in greater detail. From the beginning, Bill has expressed his approval of our relationship. However, during the period of dating, he and I will essentially live as roommates. He is moving out of the bedroom and creating a room downstairs. Therefore, while you can still remain married and we can still see each other, I am still curious as to why this is necessary. I must confess that I am perplexed as to why we even refer to this arrangement as a marriage. We had agreed to meet the following day at lunchtime, but at a local motel rather than at our home. I am unsure why I was reluctant to come here at that time. Now that I had been granted permission, I felt compelled to be polite, at least at first. My thoughts continued to spiral as I considered the reasons behind Scott's reaction. It was not an ideal situation, yet it still seemed too good to be true. Scott and I saw each other in passing during the evenings, and he was polite, friendly, and even offered to be my drinking buddy. There was no physical or emotional intimacy. I attempted to initiate more personal conversations, but he politely changed the subject. I began to feel as though I was missing something. The following day, I met Bill, and the sexual encounter was merely ordinary. I am unable to deny this. I wish I could explain or change it, but I am unable to do so. It was as if all the exciting aspects had been removed. Now that Scott was aware of them, were they merely a facade that had initially created excitement, or was it becoming evident that I required love and passion equally? And passion alone was no longer sufficient. As I continued to reflect, it became increasingly evident that I had what I desired, and it was not at all what I anticipated. Have you heard the story of the parent who locks their child in a closet and forces them to smoke a few cigarettes when they catch them smoking? I was experiencing a similar phenomenon. It could not be what Scott believed, or could it? This would be a highly sophisticated form of revenge. I was perplexed by his apparent lack of desire for retribution. Could it be that he was exacting a form of vengeance in the meantime? I made a spontaneous decision to visit the bank, although I am uncertain as to the precise reason. My intention was to request a statement to ensure the accuracy of my checkbook balances. To my astonishment, I discovered that my balance had been significantly depleted. I proceeded to examine our savings account and discovered that half of the funds had also been withdrawn. I sought clarification on this matter and was informed that Scott had withdrawn half of each account a few days prior. At this juncture, I began to comprehend the gravity of the situation. The gravity of the situation became immediately apparent. I was compelled to speak with Scott as soon as I returned home. I approached him and inquired, "Scott, may I speak with you?" I observed that he was seated on the couch, engrossed in the game of his favorite college basketball team. Attached to his arm was a puppet parrot with a large red head and a yellow beak, displaying the letters "COO" on its blue body. He alternated between focusing on the game and shouting at the television. Eventually, he became aware of my presence and paused the game. I reflected on the convenience of digital video recorders. I then proceeded to inquire, "Scott, why did you take half of our money from our bank accounts?" I was considering this until we resume a conventional marriage, at which point dividing up the finances is pointless. There is a check at the end of the table for half the mortgage and utilities, but that is not the issue. Scott, this is just another obstacle between us. Scott considered this for a moment and then spoke. I don't understand. You wanted to be able to date other men, but you didn't want to lose anything in our relationship. Remember, I said I'd give him up if you wanted me to. It's not fair, Scott. You did not want to do it just because it was the right thing to do or out of respect for me. You only wanted to do it if it was the only way to stay together. When you put it like that, it is clear that things did not go the way you wanted at all. What should you do now? I had really opened Pandora's box and was starting to see it. Lisa, let me help you with something. I agreed to stay married because I was not 100% sure that I was doing everything possible to communicate our needs and feelings to each other. As time passed, I found myself reluctant to simply end the marriage, despite the fact that you cheated on me and displayed a lack of confidence in my ability to maintain the relationship. Despite these shortcomings, I recognize that I am still a young individual, and I am sorry for the difficulties I have caused. However, I am the only one I have, and I may not be sexually attractive to you anymore, but I still possess pride and a male ego. I am not willing to tolerate disrespect. I am curious as to how our friends and family will perceive this situation. If they discover that you are in a relationship, particularly given my awareness of this and my consent to allow you to maintain your connection with him while I remain in the picture, I must respectfully decline. I would be remiss if I did not reiterate my question regarding the duration of your involvement with Bill. I was not officially dating Bill, but I was engaging in various forms of contact with him. As the implications of my actions became increasingly apparent, I found myself grappling with a growing sense of self-reproach and dissatisfaction with my circumstances. After a period of approximately 1 year, a lengthy period of silence ensued. Then, once again, there was no point in engaging in deceit. Consequently, the following scenario will unfold. 1 year after the cessation of romantic involvement with Bill or any other individual, we can commence discussions regarding the possibility of rekindling our marital union in a tangible manner. If you are amenable, I would like to emphasize the significance of this undertaking. I was gradually coming to recognize the extent of my misdeeds and the profound impact they had on the man I had come to cherish more than ever. I was cognizant of the futility of imploring him to reconsider. I engaged in infidelity with Scott, yet I had the audacity, insensitivity, and selfishness to request that he continue it and also to retain the aspects of our marriage that I held most dear. I began to hate myself. It would be a lengthy period, but I was resolved to wait until it was over, probably another month or so. I had 1 or 2 more encounters with Bill to relish the memories. As you might have guessed, I contacted Bill and arranged to meet with him the following day. I am, without a doubt, the epitome of self. Despite the destructive nature of my actions, I proceeded to engage in the aforementioned behavior following a further 2 hours of interaction. I was driven to the point of contemplating cleansing myself with steel wool. However, this experience lacked both excitement and enjoyment. Instead, I felt a sense of uncleanliness and cheapness as I departed. I informed him of my intention to terminate all communication. Unfortunately, he appeared indifferent to my decision. I was particularly concerned about the prospect of our relationship becoming awkward, given his persistent insistence. Nevertheless, I hoped that he would attempt to persuade me otherwise. To remain in the relationship for the sake of my ego, the situation improved. It was unlikely that Scott could have foreseen the outcome. He was unaware of my emotional state and the timing of Bill's departure. I informed Scott that Bill and I had ended the relationship. I was uncertain of my expectations. I hoped that he would be happy and forgive me. However, he simply noted the change in status on his calendar and turned to me. I am grateful for this outcome. Given your decision, it is imperative that you understand my perspective. I do not believe you, and I do not believe that you will not find someone else. To regain my trust, you will have to prove to me that you have not dated other men within a year from this moment. I am unsure of how you will do it, but it is not my concern. Scott turned to leave and then turned around. I have a guest for dinner tomorrow night, so this was the final blow. The aforementioned incident was intended to be the final blow. However, it seems that I have not yet learned my lesson. In addition, I have experienced a sense of pity. To summarize, After I was caught, I discovered that sexual intercourse with my partner became immediately uninteresting. Secondly, I began to miss the emotional intimacy in my marriage. Thirdly, I realized the importance of the non-sexual aspect of my physical relationship with my husband. 4. I was unhappy with myself because I felt guilty. 5. She suffered greatly because of the pain caused to Scott. Lauren was 5 feet 3 inches and weighed 105 pounds. She had red hair and C-cup breasts. She worked in the next office building to Scott. They crossed paths in the connecting garage and at the reception desk on occasion. She seemed to have a slight attraction to Scott for quite some time, but he did not reciprocate her feelings. They engaged in cordial discourse, and he now felt at liberty to do so. They had been dating for approximately 2 weeks and exhibited a high degree of comfort with one another. She arrived, and Scott prepared steaks, which she commended repeatedly. I am aware of this information because I have been observing through windows and doors throughout her entire visit. She departed at approximately 11 o'clock. At 10 p.m., I feigned an exit from my room to retrieve a glass of water. She is quite attractive, I informed Scott. Thank you for acknowledging that. I am perplexed as to why you brought her here to provide me with a lesson. I am unaware of the context of your remarks. Lisa, you have been involved in a romantic relationship with someone for over 2 years. Have you been clandestinely dating someone else behind my back? Are you truly going to be envious of me for pursuing a relationship with someone new, particularly when we previously agreed that we did not owe each other any further loyalty? Loyalty, I must profess a certain bewilderment. I am beginning to perceive the extent of my own selfishness. I am compelled to request, or perhaps even implore, your return. I am prepared to accept your decision, whatever it may be. We shall revisit this matter in a year's time and see how things stand. Lisa, I had not anticipated being capable of shedding further tears, but I have found a way to make this lengthy narrative at least somewhat briefer. I have held out for the next year, taking on an additional role. I secured a position that allowed me to pay for the services of tracking me through cameras and recording devices. I later learned that this was how I was caught. I sent reports directly to Scott, who never commented on them. He continued to act friendly towards me, but his wall remained intact. He continued to date Lauren. I tried not to interfere with their time together, but I assumed they were very serious about each other. It was the longest and most painful year of my life. I oscillated between self-pity and self-reflection. I experienced feelings of hatred because I was aware of how much I had hurt Scott and deserved the consequences that befell me. Scott did not express overt anger or make any remarks that might suggest that my actions were solely driven by revenge. He likely felt that he needed this period to regain his lost dignity at the conclusion of my year of cleansing. I approached Scott and inquired, "Can we discuss the matter?" Scott replied, "Of course, Lisa." "What happened?" I responded, "You may not remember, but it has been a year. I believe we can agree that I have fulfilled all the requirements you set forth. However, I am reluctant to leave the outcome to chance. I spent the majority of the past year pondering the underlying cause of my S. I would have liked to have an answer that would portray me in a more favorable light. However, I recognize that my actions were driven by selfishness. I desired the entirety of our relationship, but I also sought the thrill of a clandestine affair. My actions were not influenced by Bill as an individual. At the outset, I informed myself that if I did not ascertain the truth, I would not harm you. Now that I have had time to reflect on the matter without emotional influence, I am ashamed of my actions. I was ashamed at the time, but evidently not sufficiently so to cease my behavior. I wish to inform you that I am willing to do whatever is necessary to rectify the situation between us. I am gratified and impressed by your thoughts and understanding, provided that they are genuine. However, I must inform you that Lauren and I have decided I fell in love with her and, while I do not intend to cause you emotional distress, I must acknowledge that sexual intercourse with her is markedly superior to sexual intercourse with you. Furthermore, I believe she is a more suitable partner for me in terms of sexual, emotional, mental, and intellectual compatibility. Additionally, she shares my interest in golf. I am genuinely sorry for causing you pain, but I believe it is necessary for me to move forward and initiate divorce proceedings. Scott paused for a moment and looked at me, then turned and walked away. I collapsed on the floor and began to sob.